her father sold her to the mafia. Oh, it's been a minute since I've received a comment on one of my videos that's made me so viscerally angry that I've decided to go out and buy specific books to make videos to prove a point. I don't even know if that's actually happened before, but I did receive a video on my Haunting Adeline video, which I will leave linked in one of the corners, hopefully, that made me very upset. And I will not be pointing out this comment, but I will be addressing a point of contention that that comment left in me, obviously. And we will be talking about Den of Vipers, as you can probably tell from the title and thumbnail of this video. I won't be sharing the comment itself, but I will be basically posing a question to the class, so to speak. So if you've clicked on this video, you are now part of an experiment that I decided to go through, where I read Den of Vipers to prove a point. The question I'm posing is pretty simple. Which is a better dark romance? Haunting Adeline or Den of Vipers? First, bear with me, I want to go on a tangent that's probably going to get me demonetized. And that's even before we talk about everything else. Also, in the script, I wrote demonetized, and I think that's hilarious. Also, just a quick shout out, I do have a vlog for this on my channel, and a big thank you to my patrons. I read both of these books and had a very interesting time with them. Without further ado, let's talk about Killing Stalking. Killing Stalking is a manhwa, and this is a horror series. Obviously, this is not what you thought you were signing up for when you clicked on this video, but I want to talk about this. So we're going to talk about it. This is not dark romance. Let me be very clear. This book's main character is a man named Yoon Bum. He is unhealthily obsessed with another man that he was in the military with, and he decides that he's going to stalk said man and break into this man's house. It's this guy, if you couldn't tell. This man's name is Sung-woo, and the relationship Bum has with him is incredibly one-sided. Bum does not know much about this man at all. And when he breaks into this guy's house, he of course does some weird shit, like, you know, getting into Sung-woo's bed and it's as comfortable as it sounds. Upon finding a trap door in Sung-woo's apartment, Bum discovers at the bottom of some stairs a woman who is mostly nude, bound, and clearly in distress. So this is when we and Bum discover that the object of Bum's obsession and stalking is in fact a serial killer. Oh boy. What unfolds after is this terrifying narrative following Bum's completely unreliable, delusional relationship with Sung-woo as he is now trapped inside Sung-woo's apartment. Both have this battle with their particular demons as they cohabitate this living situation that is clearly very fucked up. I have only read this first volume in this series, but there is a reason why I bring this specific series up. I want to prove a point. In the comment that I received in my Haunting Adeline video, I was told that I couldn't be mad at the author of a dark romance for including dark things in her book because that's a genre convention. And I want to be very clear with you. I most certainly can be mad at an author for what they include in their books. First of all, you're underestimating the person that I am. My channel name may be a little bit mad, but I got big emotions when it comes to romanticizing abuse. Dark romance is a subgenre of romance. If Kugi were to have written in a concrete romance between Bum and Sung-woo, I would have been as horrified by this story as I was by Haunting Adeline. Let's talk a little bit more about Authorial Intent. I touched on this in the Haunting Adeline video a little bit, but I think we need to go into a little bit more depth. Do bear with me, I am going to talk about Den of Vipers in this video. You can see the timestamp, I'm sure we're gonna be here for a minute. Haunting Adeline is QAnon propaganda, despite the author's note to the contrary. H.D. Carlton tried to say in her author's note that she wasn't trying to push certain narratives on people, but she very specifically says that any conspiracy theories referenced were things that she had taken in via media that she had been witnessing. Basically means she may have not intended to create QAnon fanfiction, but it does read like she did. There's a bunch of articles specifically on how fake news and like biased media can sway people's emotions, and that's why I have a lot of issues with Haunting Adeline as a very popular book, before I even touch on the fact that Zaid is a confirmed rapist, bear in mind, and is still wildly popular all over book talk. Because Zaid and the way that the romance unfurls in that story really plucks on your emotional heartstrings, means that you're going to be more susceptible to certain aspects in media that are trying to push a narrative, even if you aren't aware of, or the person making the media isn't aware of that media or narrative being pushed. You know what I'm saying? I know once again that some of you are like, when are we getting to Den of Vipers? When are we getting to Den of Vipers? Hold your motherfucking horses. I have my honor to defend here. If Haunting Adeline had just been a horror novel specifically about the terrifying reality of a woman living alone in a house that's unprotected and all of the shit that can go wrong with that and preying on that mentality, that would have been something I would have been interested in. It would have played on the sick sense of terror that people have, which is exactly what the book does in itself, but then it goes out of its way to exonerate the person that essays the fucking heroine multiple times throughout the book. What? Also, additionally, I'm pretty sure that most romances are supposed to have a happily ever after, but these books never like really have a happily ever after. The main character is always kidnapped, and I've heard that in the sequel of this book, that's the one that's not banned, by the way, like she's just like attacked a lot, and I don't necessarily think that I want to read that, but I guess we'll find out. You guys like me to read things that I don't want to fucking do, so here we are talking about books. Moving on. I would probably still find a lot of H.D. Carlton's work pretty fucking annoying just because the book on a technical level wasn't even written well, and I, as a reviewer, get to express my opinions on how badly a book is written because I, in fact, am a reviewer. That's kind of the job. I happen to have a little bit of credibility at this point. There's 16,000 of y'all now. I also would love it if we could get to 20K by the end of the year. Do we think we can do it? Hit the subscribe button down below. That'd be fucking awesome. Moving on, let's talk about a book that, even though it wasn't necessarily written well on a technical level, I still thoroughly enjoyed. Let's talk about Den of Vipers. Yes, you heard me right. I unabashedly find this book to be good fun. Now, if you aren't aware of what this book is, you must be thoroughly fucking confused. I read this back, I think in 2021, 22, when it was going around the TikTok circles as like affectionately named the Texas Chainsaw Massacre smut, which is not an accurate blurb, to be honest. I don't know who coined that, but for reference, that's what got me interested in this book in the first place. The first time I read this book, I read all 500 whatever pages of it on my phone on Kindle Unlimited in a singular night. Like, I literally just laid in my bed and just like that all night. Moving on. My overall reaction to my first read of Den of Vipers was just, wow, that shit was wild. Moving on. And that, I think, personally should be the extent of my reactions to dark romances. I am not a dark romance girly, despite my entire channel seeming to convey to you guys the exact opposite at this point. But it's not my personal fucking favorite genre, and I tend to find it to be a little bit ridiculous and over the top, and then I move on. And that's exactly what Den of Vipers gave me, and I feel like we should just talk about it at this point, because Den of Vipers, if you haven't read it or heard about it and don't want to read it, let me tell you what happens in it. It's a fun, weird, no chill kind of time. Let's go ahead and go over the plot points, of which in a 500-page book, there's not a lot. In the opening scene of Den of Vipers, we are following Diesel. He is my favorite character. He's narrating a scene where the 4 men of the Viper elite mafia group are torturing a man together, which is not regular. That doesn't happen all that often. This man owes them money. like a lot of money. I cannot recall why he owes them money. I don't know if he was part of their like gambling houses, couldn't tell you. He just owes them a lot of money and he cannot pay it back. So in return for them to stop torturing him, he offers them his adult daughter. They agree to this ridiculous situation despite A, there being no money in it for them, and B, it's not like this guy had any control over his daughter. She like ran away when she was a teenager and he doesn't have any contact with her. So I'm not sure how this transaction works, but apparently this is a very common dark romance or just fan fiction-y concept in general. I've heard about a lot of fan fictions where my parents sold me to One Direction and I can't help it but don't get it. But other than that, moving along, that is our inciting incident. Her father sold her to the mafia. Speaking of our heroine, let's meet Roxy. Roxy is a bartender slash owner of a bar, and she is a rocker chick and badass and likes to wear leather and kick-ass boots. But I also love that, just because, like I mentioned in Haunting Adeline, I feel like a lot of these authors haven't ever been in a bar before, because the way that Roxy describes her job, it sounds like she goes into like a war zone every night, but it's a dive bar. And as a more than regular frequent person at this kind of establishment, I've never seen a person that bartends for a living have to get overly physical with people on a frequent basis. So I'm not exactly sure where this like hardened bartender like kind of concept comes from. I get that maybe she's seen some shit because of her like backstory, but it's still funny to me that like the way that she describes her job is so off kilter with like my perception of a dive bar that I get it. They're kind of salt of the earth people, but like Roxy straight up talks about how like she's like really fucking tough, even though she's like maybe 5'2". So the Viper guys send over some goons to grab Roxy. She doesn't take this very well. One of them breaks a stool, so she breaks his kneecap with her bat, because very Harley Quinn coded. So as you can imagine, our guys in Versace and Vengeance don't particularly take to the fact that their guys go down like bitches. Since they can't trust anyone to do the job, they have to go do it themselves. They go to pick up our dame very much in distress, and she also doesn't take to this very pleasantly either. She gets one of them in the gonads before Diesel punches her in the fucking face. Despite this like first meeting not going exactly to plan, all four of the Viper guys do find that they have this weird sense of attraction to this foul-mouthed bartender. So Roxy wakes up feeling like she got punched in the face, because she did. She's in this like ornate, beautiful bedroom in this like fancy apartment building. And I could not imagine anything about this apartment building looking like a normal place people live, but like rather like a set where a porno is like shot, like a weird workplace. Never mind, we're moving on. She wakes up and the door is locked, and rightfully she trashes the place, which I would as well. That just makes fucking sense. She ends up cutting herself pretty on her hand from a mirror that she breaks, which comes up later when Diesel starts being weird about her cuts and blood, and that's kind of his thing. They have to leave her with one of the guys in the apartment because otherwise she'll hurt herself, obviously. And in one of the first scenes, she's with Kenzo, whose whole personality is just he likes gambling and he's hot. And on one of their first scenes together, they end up playing Flip Cup, and of course they make a bet. And despite the fact that Roxy is like, I'm a bartender, I can do anything when it comes to alcohol, she loses. So there's a pretty intense scene there where stuff happens, and Diesel is just, you know, chilling like a villain. That was totally not intentional. And in the scene between Kenzo and Roxy, she is like telling him to like fuck off. She hates it, but like there is this undercurrent in her narration where it's clear that she likes the attention that she's getting. She is into it, and they like hate fuck, and it's definitely where there's a little bit less confirmed enthusiastic consent, but there isn't the like terrifying realization on Adeline's part where she's like, I'm being raped. Like, you know, that's the biggest difference between these books, is that like Roxy, even though she's like fighting back, there's this current of enthusiastic consent underneath, whereas in this book, that doesn't exist. This is romanticized abuse. Additionally, there's also Ryder. He's the ringleader of the Viper gang. His whole personality is suits. There's also a bunch of parts in this book where there's like mafia shit, mob stuff. Like, we don't really have to spend any time on that because it's not important, and clearly they just do business, and that's Ryder's job. He's the only one that I think has a job, really. And yeah, that's about it. We can move on. Speaking of Ryder and Kenzo are brothers, and they have this really intense backstory that Roxy ends up kind of relating to. Their parents were not great, kind of like hers sold her to the fucking mafia, even though I still don't understand why. It seems like just a bad business practice. She doesn't make them any money, so I'm not exactly sure why. And also they lose a lot of money because they spend it on her because they like her, you know what I'm saying? They're like buying her gifts and shit. So I don't get that. What I do like about this particular story though is that despite Roxy being a heroine that kind of sounds like a 13-year-old with her first Hot Topic gift card is writing her, there still is a lot of depth and like passion behind the backstories that all of these characters have, albeit it definitely feels kind of like trauma porn at some points, but it could definitely send, like, there is a concrete reason why Roxy likes each of these men, and I find that to be much more intriguing as a reader instead of a guy who doesn't seemingly have a past, who just kind of shows up in your life and decides that he wants to be with you for reasons unfucking known. Like, it's fascinating to me that this book has a better romance with all four of these guys than Honey Adeline did with one dude who is just a bad person. He's just a bad person. Like, don't get me wrong, the guys in this aren't great people either, but like, at least they have like motivations and concrete realities that the actual story puts into like work into showing you. Like, Ryder feels a lot for Kenzo. Kenzo is his little brother, and Ryder feels protective over all of the Vipers. That's his main driving force. He's very protective, and you can see that he really cares for Kenzo, and when Kenzo starts a relationship with Roxy, Ryder feels exceptionally happy about it, and he does that for pretty much all of these characters. Which is where I want to pause again and talk about a concept that's recently taken over my life, and that is polyamory. The reverse harem trope in and of itself is problematic. First of all, calling it reverse harem is just stigmatizing and gross. But what I find interesting about these stories is that despite this being a polyamorous relationship with Roxy just having multiple boyfriends, polyamory and ethical non-monogamy are never mentioned. The men who are in a relationship with Roxy are still extremely jealous and will kill a bitch if they touch their bitch upon sight. Just like all of the alpha holes and all of these other books, that's just a general genre convention. Additionally, these books don't even have a hint of homosexuality. Roxy hates women, hates them, spends a bunch of time hating on like other women and calling them gold diggers and things like that, even though when she gets taken into the Viper gang, she isn't paying for anything, and she is definitively like garnering like things because she's with these men, and like that's the definition of gold digging. I'm like, I don't know why you're calling other people pot black, you know what I'm saying? Moving, the guys are like very straight. So despite the fact that there are group sex scenes, they're 5 feet apart because they're not gay. I'm realizing now when I make Vine references, those might be dated and might be a little confusing to some people who haven't heard that before. Too bad. Like, the amount of times the guys say, oh, I'm not crossing swords with you, when they're gonna be having sex with one person at the same time is just kind of uncomfortable. Also a little redundant and weird on the author's part. Like, I get the fact that like there's this general like I don't share mentality for the alpha male persona in these books, but these guys definitively are sharing, but we still have to force this like really homophobic concept that like they don't want to fuck each other. Albeit, considering that a couple of them are related, I don't mind the fact that that boundary is very clear in this book. Looking at you, Sierra Simone. That being said, this book, like many of the other reverse harem books that I've read, which albeit isn't all that many, they don't really delve into the difficulties of dating multiple people. And I really wish that it did, because I feel like this book would have been better for it. But obviously in this particular fantasy, that's not what's being explored, and that is unfortunate to me. At this point in writing the script, I wanted the video to not be a million years long, so let's keep going and just jump to the part of the book that everyone knows about, or if you don't know about, get ready. It's Vipin time.
What you got there? No!
So I'm sure if you've read this book or if you have heard about this scene, there's a scene where Diesel, who's, you know, the assassin guy and kind of crazy. He kind of reminds me of the Hound from Game of Thrones, except like he looks like this. He's got tattoos. I'm pretty sure there's flames on his hip bones. And he calls Roxy Little Bird. He also likes fire. That's like the big difference though. Well, there's this guy, and he likes to do certain things. And then he takes an implement and he inserts that implement into an orifice, and then he inserts part of his body into another orifice, and then he impales himself on the implement that was once inserted into that other orifice.
They ask you how you are, you just have to say that you're fine when you're not really fine, but you just can't get into it because they would never understand.
It's as confusing as it sounds. It doesn't make a lot of sense, but I will say the one proponent of this book is that it was consented to. Now, I get why the dark romance girlies like this, I think. But if we were to compare this scene to the scene from Haunting Adeline that I didn't even mention in my review because I didn't want to get demonetized, there is one big difference when it comes to having a deadly weapon involved in your smut scene. Consent is sexy, oh so sexy. Please ask before you insert a deadly weapon into someone's body. Thank you. I wish I had more to say about this particular scene in Den of Vipers, but I don't. It was a scene that existed and it actually isn't terribly written. Like, the grammar was fine and it happened. It was, yep, we're gonna move on because, oh God. Is another guy that I actually haven't talked about, and there's a scene or like a storyline that I kind of want to highlight as kind of like an ending note for Den of Vipers, because Den of Vipers is, once again, a dark romance, and I don't particularly love everything about it, and there is a storyline that I really think we should unpack a little bit before I close out the video. And that's about Garrett. Garrett's whole personality is that he hates women, and not in a funny way. I'm not sure how you could hate women in a funny way, but like he hates women. And Roxy, our lovely lady, decides to invade his personal space. And bear in mind, Garrett's like whole job is being a fighter. He's like 6'7" and throws people around for a living. And Roxy doesn't have a lot of like stability or like mental awareness that this guy doesn't want her around. And despite the fact that he continuously tells her, fuck off, leave me alone, I will hurt you if you don't fuck off and leave me alone, she doesn't really listen. The thing is that Roxy doesn't like to have consent either, and she just really wants to have sex with pretty much all of these guys and blames it on her anatomy. And the phrase pussy power is used in like a joking way, but like a lot of times when she wants the guys or is attracted to them, she like yells at her vagina, which is just fucking ridiculous. Like, your pussy, ma'am, is not to blame here. Like, please. It's very strange and also like biologically centered, and I don't love it, and that's like obviously a whole other thing. But Garrett doesn't want to do anything with her, and despite that fact being very well known, Roxy just continues pushing. She ends up finding a way to get Garrett to want to have sex with her, and that is having her be tied up and restrained, and he enjoys that. For a little bit of context, Garrett was restrained by an ex-girlfriend and mutilated. Like, he has scars all over his chest, tortured. That's where the hatred of women comes from. It's a very triggering situation. But Roxy's reaction to his scars and his trauma is to say that it's sexy and that he should get over it. What? The ever funny words of Sam Levinson and the smash disaster that is The Idol, mental illness is sexy. So what I'm trying to say is, yes, Den of Vipers could be considered a high camp, dark romance, closed polycule relationship nightmare, but there are some aspects that I feel in this book probably shouldn't be portrayed in the way they're being portrayed. Like, when I reread this, I did raise my rating to 4 stars. It took me like a full week to get through this book the second time that I read it, despite the first time I read it in a night, you know? The book has really no plot. We've kind of covered it most of the way. For a little bit more breakdown, Roxy gets kidnapped. Roxy tries to run away. She's not allowed to run away. Sex. She comes back, but she doesn't actually want to run away anymore. More sex. Roxy and her guys intimidate random people and servers and like just anyone for reasons, apparently. More sex. Diesel kills a guy in front of Roxy. Sex. Garrett fights someone, Kenzo gambles, more sex. And then Roxy gets kidnapped by Garrett's ex, question mark? I can't quite remember who kidnaps her. There were people that were like intimidating them, but like she's involved. This particular kidnapping trope is very prominent in the mafia romance. I know that 365 Days does it. I already mentioned that Haunting Adeline does it, I think at the ending of Haunting Adeline. So at some point she gets kidnapped. Kidnapping is very popular in this genre. It almost takes like the third act breakup away from the main romance genre and just makes it so that the heroes have to go save their girl. But I will say, Roxy's torture scene, kind of fucking hilarious. Kind of fucking hilarious. She mouths off to the guy when she wakes up after, you know, being bludgeoned and kidnapped. And he's like wearing just leather pants and no shirt. And she's like, hey, when I wear leather pants, I get really bad chafing. Do you get chafing? And the guy goes, baby powder. She's like, oh, I guess I'll think about that after I am not kidnapped and in danger anymore. He also roasts this dude named Andrew for being named Andrew, and no comment. But additionally in this scene, there's a point where the guys that are torturing her are like, why are you so loyal to these men that like kidnapped you? And she's like, well, all romantic stories are a little traumatic. Just look at Romeo and Juliet. And I know Miss Knight didn't think that she could compare her writing to William Shakespeare, but additionally, most romantic stories don't have a bunch of trauma, and like I feel like that's kind of something that's missing here. We don't necessarily need that, and when you do compare your story to that story, it's kind of silly because that story does... I'm gonna move on. I'm not gonna Shakespeare nerd all over my Den of Vipers video. That's ridiculous. But I will say, the best part of this entire book, the part that made me really love Diesel as a character, is so silly, it's so small, it has nothing to do with the rest of the story, but when he and the other guys are going to go get their bitch, he wears a fanny pack and he puts grenades in it and sometimes snacks. He's crazy, he's psychotic in a lot of ways, but oh my god, I love that. I loved it so much. It's so silly. I loved it. You can all be like, what the fuck is wrong with you, baddie, in the comments, because you should, But he brings a fanny pack to our rescue mission and he puts grenades in it and sometimes snacks. I'm sorry, that's so fucking camp to me at least. I know I'm probably using it wrong, but like that's ridiculous and beautiful at the same time. You can't tell me otherwise. After the rescue mission, there's a bunch of recuperating sex scenes because of course there are. Roxy kills her dad at some point and then they buy a mansion, I think. And they kidnap a preacher guy and hold him at gunpoint so that he'll marry them. All 4 guys can marry Roxy. Because if there's a lesson that you should take from this book here, Den of Vipers, it's that if you have a gun, polygamy is legal. And scene. All right, guys, like, subscribe, all the good stuff. Bye! No, but like really, like that's it. That's the video. I'm done. I'm done doing this. Bye-bye. If Haunting Adeline had been, I have an eyelash in my eyeball. Do you guys hear about the book talk book where somebody takes somebody's eyeball out and then fucks the socket? Because I've heard about that one. I don't know which one it is. I'm sure I'll read it at some point. I got an ice cube in my mouth. Without a doubt, when I sit down to film, someone's playing super fucking loud music. But the problem is that I never know that they're playing loud music until I sit down to film because that's when I turn my super loud music off.